So we're going to have a very reflective service this morning. We're kind of working around the message of watchfulness, silence. There's that famous or well-known instruction that Jesus gives his disciples when they go into the Garden of Gethsemane right before he's arrested, and he says, "Watch and pray." And the Orthodox Christian Church has used that for millennia as the byword of how to approach the spiritual life, that the spiritual life is actually something that must be cultivated within the heart, that it's not an external thing, and it's not an ego-centered God that exists apart from the mind, but is actually the state of the heart. And so when the heart is healthy and purified, one naturally begins to feel the divine presence dwelling within. And this is really the idea, that the divine presence is in embryo, so to speak, within our heart. And by cultivating a sense of watchfulness and prayer and deepening the silence, we begin to actualize this new birth, right? We actually have a spiritual rebirth. And this takes place directly within the state of the heart. And that's why it's more intimate and direct than anything that the world can present. It's not done through any kind of an analytical process. It's done, as the Orthodox mystics will say, by dropping the mind into the heart. So the mind that is always thinking and deliberating and caught in language and speech, that all of that type of thinking has to get quiet. And then the point of view that we normally look out from as these mental beings, that point of view has to actually descend. And it has to descend into the ocean or the silence of the heart. And so this is the mystical process within every tradition. And we're just finishing up a class on mindfulness through the Buddhist teachings. And it's very much the same. And the Buddha is teaching that the idea of mindfulness is the pathway to enlightenment. Without mindfulness, which is your Buddha nature, you can't enter this state of awakened presence, divine presence. And so watchfulness or mindfulness is something that must be cultivated. That's why in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, meditation is referred to as bhavana. And bhavana has this process, this idea of process related to it. Cultivation, incubation is something that you get in the ancient Greek mystical traditions through Empedocles and Parmenides. This idea of incubating, that there's a potential that needs to be developed, and that potential is the Christ seed, right? A sower goes out to sow, that famous parable. And the seed or the logos or the word gets planted within different kinds of ground, rocky ground, weeded ground, shallow ground, good ground. And this seed or this potential of the Christ light or Christ presence, it determines whether or not it comes to birth based on the ground, based on the state of the heart. And so this is what we're going to be playing with this morning. This idea of watchfulness, prayer, silence. Excuse me. The other important element to this is learning how to tame the mind. So again, within the Buddhist tradition, they distinguish two things. The original process is one of taming the mind, because the mind is like a mad elephant, says the Buddha. Right? It's like an elephant that ate some kind of fermented fruit, and it's like going crazy in its mind. And it can be very destructive. You don't want to be in the pathway of a pissed off bull elephant, right? It'll just, tear everything up. So the taming of the mind is really important, because we all start out with a monkey mind or a mad elephant mind. And there's no way we can allow that descent into silence to take place for ourselves, because the mind is too preoccupied, it's too busy, it's analyzing and judging everything. And when we're in that state of mind, there's inherent within that a dualism, that you somehow exist extraneous to whatever else is going on in the world. So by taming the mind, you begin to actually soften into a more felt experience of the present moment, and judgment begins to actually evaporate. This idea of judging and analyzing and critiquing and evaluating everything is one of the major impediments to entering the silence. And so we'll see how when the mind gets tamed, the Buddha says, it can then be trained. And so this mind training, which is this cultivation of mindfulness, can only take place when we have put in the effort to quiet down our desires, our anger, our fear, our ideas about what's to come or what has happened. All of that needs to go into an abeyance, right? At least for our practice periods. And what's beautiful about it is, you don't have to force yourself into any kind of lifestyle change except by incorporating these periods of quiet and deep reflection into your schedule. Because what begins to happen is, as the mind becomes quieter and more pliant to the impulses of this higher intention of awakening, when you're not in your meditation and you're about your everyday, these habitual tendencies will eventually come back. And what happens is you begin to realize that there's a different quality to your awareness when these habit patterns recirculate. And you're not caught almost as suddenly as you were before. And as you keep cultivating mindfulness, you actually begin to realize that you're becoming aware of these unconscious patterns more and more. And you realize that if you do go to sleep and you're not watchful and prayerful, and you do go to sleep to the lower tendencies of the body-mind, then there's pain. There's anxiety, there's discomfort, there's fear. And so the natural cultivating of mindfulness begins to also bring insight. And the insight is really waking up to spiritual maturity. And when you're mature, you know what causes pain and you know what causes joy. You have discernment. And that's why these teachings have often been encapsulated in the phrase of they are designed to have you avoid future pain. That's what these teachings are essentially designed to do, because you can start to see around the corner, so to speak. Okay, so long introduction. Let's get into it. So before we get into the teachings, let's get into the quiet heart and the open mind. So you're just going to follow your breath, be aware of the in-breath and the out-breath, relax, savor the sensations, and be very aware. And so from this place of inner and outer silence, we simply open to the sacred space, which is an intention that we may see things differently, from a different perspective, that we may have the perspective of insight, of wisdom, of clarity, and deep understanding of ourself and the world. So it is. So we'll start with a little bit of this well-known poem or collection of poems from Khalil Gibran, the prophet. And he's asked these series of questions sort of as a farewell to his beloved city that he was spending time in. And the boats are coming to pick him up, and the prophet is leaving. And so he's also leaving these nuggets of wisdom and these gems of insight. And so all the different townspeople, including the priests and the priestesses and the teachers, are asking him these questions, right? So this one is from the teacher. Then said a teacher, "Speak to us of teaching." And he said, "No one can reveal to you aught but that which already lies half asleep in the dawning of your knowledge." So we talked about this last week, this idea of learning and education. That education, the word means to educe, something that's already within you. So no one can tell you anything that you don't already have within potential, within your heart. So these divine teachings are actually within your heart, half asleep. And what the teachings really do is shine a light, bring your attention to what is dormant or nascent within your heart. And so as you begin to put attention on something, it begins to actualize, right? So, I don't like to get into the whole quantum mechanics thing because I have no clue about what quantum mechanics really is. But what they do say is that when you observe, let's say, the electron in these famous experiments of the double slit, that the electron is existing as a probability wave, right? It's in what's called superposition. And the electron then can exist as any possibility. But as soon as the observer, through the electron microscope in this case, but as soon as there is an observer, that infinite possibility collapses into a particle of particularity and with a direction and a speed in terms of its appearance within the physical world. And so within the heart, you could say that the heart is the quantum field where there's infinite potentiality. But through this process of paying attention to a certain set of patterns and beliefs, we are in a habit of collapsing this probability wave into this particular life with these particular values and these particular viewpoints and these particular habits. And so what we pay attention to and what we cultivate over time continues as this lasting residue within every moment. And we just become very habitualized. In Gurdjieff's terms, we become asleep and robotic. We're like machines, just repeating these unconscious patterns because of habit, culture, parental upbringing. What's the intelligentsia? What's their opinions? They're now my opinions. We live, as Plato says, this unexamined life. And so when the teaching comes, it's to have you examine your life and to look at what's half asleep within you and to awaken this dormant potential of being who you truly are. The teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and his lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. The astronomer may speak to you of his understanding of space, but he cannot give you his understanding. The musician may sing to you of the rhythm, which is in all space, but he cannot give you the ear, which arrests the rhythm, nor the voice that echoes it. And he who is versed in the science of numbers can tell of the regions of weight and measure, but he cannot conduct you thither. For the vision of one man lends not its wings to another man, and even as each one of you stands alone in God's knowledge, so must each one of you be alone in his knowledge of God and in his understanding of the earth. So basically, no one can do this for you. You have to want it and will it for yourself. You are simply brought to the door of your own inner knowledge by the wise teacher who realizes that he is only a finger or she is only a finger pointing in the direction. You must walk the path. You must come to your own settled decision to enter into this knowledge or not. But this is never done for you. Right? This is a pretty universal teaching. And I think Khalil Gibran is hinting at something also where it's famously said that the journey to God is from the alone to the alone. That you walk this path in your own aloneness. Your choices are your choices. It's deeply subjective, right? And so we get to experience the fruit of our own choice making. And that alone is what we encounter in our life. That's pretty wild to think, that everything that's showing up in your world, as Jesus will say in A Course in Miracles, is there because I've decided to have it there. I choose my feelings. I determine my way by what I choose to pay attention to and what I ask for by my choices. Right? It's a deep introspection, this path. Now a scholar comes to the prophet and he says, "Speak of talking." And the prophet says, "You talk when you cease to be at peace with your thoughts, and when you can no longer dwell in the solitude of your heart, you live in your lips. And sound is a diversion and a pastime. And in much of your talking, thinking is half murdered. For thought is a bird of space that in a cage of words may find indeed that its wings can unfold, but it cannot fly. There are those among you who seek the talkative through fear of being alone. The silence of aloneness reveals to their eyes their naked selves, and they would escape. Can't bear to be with ourselves. Can't bear to sit in silence and really see what's going on below the surface. And there are those who talk, and without knowledge or forethought, reveal a truth which they themselves do not understand. So in other words, sometimes out of the mouth of babes, right? You hear these profound truths, but oftentimes the mind doesn't know what the lips are saying, and things are being said that are profound, but the one who's saying them can't hear. You often find also that we or others will give the advice that we often need to take for ourselves. Right? And sometimes if you have the awareness of what's going on in that person's life and they're going on a rant about what you should be doing or not doing, you're like, you know, that's really good medicine for you as I know you. So, the mind and the lips. And there are those who have the truth within them, but they tell it not in words. In the bosom of such as these, the spirit dwells in rhythmic silence. Right? So this deeper silence allows you to rest within the waves of the Spirit's hidden music or silent thought, right? You're in this deep voice of the silence, right? And it's very comforting to know that oftentimes you don't have to speak. You know, there's that famous statement of St. Francis of Assisi, wherever you go and whatever you do, speak the gospel and sometimes use words. So you're emanating this presence, you're swimming in it, you're infused with it, you're imbued by this hidden music or voice. And it's broadcasting for those who have ears to hear. Right? When you meet your friend on the roadside or in the marketplace, let the Spirit in you move your lips and direct your tongue. Let the voice within your voice speak to the ear of his ear. For his soul will keep the truth of your heart, as the taste of the wine is remembered, when the color is forgotten and the vessel is no more. So in other words, when the mind has been tamed and trained and has reached this place within the heart of deep silence, there's another voice that will speak through you if you are just patient enough to allow that deeper wave of the Spirit to move you into action, to move your words, right? So this is something quite wonderful that, as we had said earlier, judgment is always implying some kind of a duality or a separation between the judge and what is being judged. And of course, in miracles, Jesus says something very profound. As we move from this wrong-mindedness of duality to the right-mindedness of non-duality, he says judgment will happen through you rather than from you. So there is one who knows. There is one who is guiding all things. It's the voice that spoke through Buddha. It's the voice that spoke through Ibn al-Arabi and Jesus and Padmasambhava and all these great beings. It's the one voice. It's wisdom, right? And so wisdom is within the heart. Wisdom, this primordial divine wisdom, is how everything is actually being governed. But because we have this sickness, in a sense, of dualistic thinking, we have split ourselves off from the totality. And it's like we have this feeling of being something other than what we're looking at. And so what the mindfulness training is designed to do, again, is to bring you into a state where what you're experiencing, what you're mindful of, is not different than you. Right? It brings this continuity to your perception. That's why they say at the ultimate state of true knowing, you are the seer, the process of seeing, and the scenery. Right? So just like when you go to sleep at night and you dream, and you manifest your dream world, and there are trees and cars and people and events and exchanges and conversation, all of that is taking place within the imagery of your own mind. Your mind is generating everything. And what the mystics are saying is you go from sleeping dreams to waking dreams. We've identified with this little ice cube of a perception on this iceberg of consciousness. And we think this little ice cube is all there is to consciousness, when it's really just this little bit of a massive iceberg. And when you go into a mystical state, in whatever tradition you want to look at, that ice cube rejoins the iceberg of consciousness, and it realizes it's generating everything. It's generating the dream. What is occurring that you're not first aware of? So everything you're aware of is what you experience. And awareness always precedes whatever you're experiencing. So awareness is this primordial ground. right? Follow me then. If you're in a state of awareness, but you're unaware of wisdom, then you have no idea what you're experiencing. It's based now within this false framework of thinking, right? Judgments, evaluations. But if you cultivate this deeper insight and wisdom, you open to wisdom again, you're actually being shown. And this higher voice, or this deeper voice, this deeper knowledge, is speaking through you and acting through you and seeing through you, right? It's good stuff. And so just a quick little look at the teachings coming from the Hebrew Bible here in Proverbs. Now, we looked at Proverbs last week. These are instructions to bring about a state of maturity, discernment, the ability to see things from a higher perspective, or the state of wisdom. And so it says here, "My child, pay attention to my words. Listen attentively to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your sight. Guard them within your heart." Right? So we're back to this idea of being watchful, guarding your heart. Because remember, your heart has infinite possibilities, and what you pay attention to will collapse the probability wave, and you will experience this quality, this virtue, this vice, this perspective. All the seeds are existing within the heart in potentia. What you pay attention to, what you will, what you want, collapses those probabilities, and you select what you will then feel and experience. You are the seer, the process of seeing, and the scenery that never changes, whether we're in a state of knowledge or ignorance. This is what we continue to do, moment by moment. So if we're not guarding our heart, as we saw last week with some of the teachings of the Sufis, you have the potentials of angels in your heart, and you have the potentials of demons within your heart. You have the potentials of the lustful pig, and you have the potentials of the ravenous, angry wolf or dog. And so all of these potentials are within the heart. And when we are not guarding, we are under these possible influences of the forces of ill. So guard your heart and keep these words of wisdom close to you. So the teacher then says to the student, "For they are life to those who find them, and healing to one's entire body. Guard your heart with all vigilance, for from your heart are the sources of life." Right? So this is the other insight that comes about, that when you reach this epicenter of what is called the heart, it's the singularity, it's the doorway into the forces of life, your spiritual power, your will, the light that flows from God to you. This is where we come to when we get very quiet, right? When we're no longer led astray by our distractive thoughts and our judgments, our habits and our conditioning. So guard your heart with all vigilance, for from it are the sources of life. And then over here in chapter 8 of Proverbs, wisdom herself is speaking, and she says, "Children, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to my instruction, so that you may be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed or happy is the one who listens to me, watching at my doors day by day, waiting beside my doorway. For the one who finds me has found life and received favor from God. But the one who misses me brings harm to himself. All who hate me love death. That's a powerful statement. So this living voice that speaks through all the great sages and master teachers, that's our voice when we go to this place within the door of the heart. There's only one voice that really knows. And we have been conditioned away from thinking we can access that. And yet we've been bequeathed all of these mystical traditions from all over the world that if we take them seriously and treasure what they say, and we have good intention, it will lead us to the doorway. Right? All good teachers, as we saw from Khalil Gibran, bring you to the threshold of your own heart. How much more beautiful is that than to know that all of heaven awaits you within your own heart? Jesus says in A Course in Miracles that God gave you heaven where you will never lose it. But it can't be found until you truly want it. So when we want it, we will seek above all else to go and find it. And this is pointing us directly back within. Tame the mind. Train the mind. Redirect your attention to the doorway within your heart where all the energies of life are flowing. All these limitless potentialities are here. But we have to find it through a choice-making process, a willingness. And the other thing that's said here that, again, is so powerful is all who hate this divine wisdom love death. So, the Sanskrit tradition of ancient India points this out very subtly. The word for higher knowledge or wisdom in Sanskrit is vidya. And the word for ignorance is avidya. And the way that Sanskrit grammar works is when you put this particle a in front of the word vidya, and it becomes avidya, it changes from knowledge to ignorance. But it's not just a mere negation. When you're in a state of ignorance, you're actually hostile to knowledge. So the example that's often given to illustrate this in the books on yoga is that in Sanskrit, the word friend is mitra, and the word for enemy is amitra. And so it's when you are in a state of wisdom or knowledge, you're in vidya. But when you're in a state of ignorance, you're not just ignoring knowledge, but the energies that are in your heart and mind are hostile to knowledge. So we can develop these ignorant habit patterns and belief systems, and we don't really know it. But in the unconscious mind, just below the threshold of our awareness, we are vigilant for death. We're vigilant for dysfunction and toxic patterns. And when we begin to look at ourselves, if we have the courage to do that, we oftentimes, like Khalil Gibran said, we don't want to be alone with ourselves. We don't want to get quiet. We don't want to be in the silence. Because if we do, we will actually begin to know what's been lurking below the surface, what we've really been living for, how we've really been showing up, how people actually do see us. And this is Carl Jung's entry to our conversation where he says, if you're going to go through this transforming process, Jung says the first thing you do when you're descending into your heart is you meet your shadow. And when you meet your shadow, he says you will look into the dark mirror. And what you'll see is how you really are, not the way you present and not what people think. You will see nakedly the face that you really are. And then Jung says, most people flee in terror once they look into the dark mirror, that they don't want to go and deal with the shadow work. And so they stay within the surface consciousness, and they talk and talk and talk. If you've ever known this, I've known people through my life who have so much repressed anger and fear and shame and guilt, and all they do is chatter. Endless, banal, senseless chatter. And it's a defense system. It's a way of keeping us from the silence and the confrontation of who we truly are. That's why we're experts at distraction. This whole world is a distraction device designed for us never to look within our own heart and discover not only the pain and the neglect, but then the need for healing. That's what Jesus says in A Course in Miracles. Once you confront where you really are in your heart, the need for healing becomes totally obvious. Will you look? It's the avoidance of future pain. You know, some people also that I know have a debilitating physical injury, and they could have received surgery a number of years ago, but for whatever reason, they had chosen not to. And so from then on have suffered an incredible amount of pain because they avoided the difficult choice and the painful process of healing. But if you take this painful process and heal, you'll get rid of future pain. But if you keep ignoring it and neglecting the state of your heart, then pain has no end. It just keeps compounding, and you can't get rid of it. You know, this is the other universal teaching within these wisdom traditions, is consciousness doesn't die, right? Consciousness is if you could even say it this way, it's a bit of a misnomer, but it's a very subtle energy. And we know just from hard science that energy doesn't die. It just changes form. And so our consciousness doesn't die. It just goes into other forms. But what carries over is our state of mind, say these wisdom traditions. So how you're showing up here is how you'll show up on the crossing over point when you leave this mortal coil. That's why we cultivate mindfulness. That's why we watch and pray and purify the heart and tame the mind. So, more on the idea of silence, the state of silence within the heart. This is an amazing book if you're into this kind of stuff. It's Christ, the Eternal Tao. And it was inspired by the work of Father Seraphim Rose, who was an Orthodox Christian. But before he converted to Orthodoxy, he studied under Alan Watts and these great Chinese mystics, and he was greatly influenced by the Taoist tradition. And so he saw, when he went into the Orthodox mystical way, a lot of cross parallels with the Taoist and the mystical tradition of the Orthodox East. And I'm just going to share a little bit here. He actually wrote the Tao Te Ching from the perspective of this mystical Christian point of view. And so this is chapter 49 of the Tao Te Ching, but given the Christian twist. Why is the sea the king of 100 streams? Asked the ancient sage. Because it lies below them. Therefore it is the king of 100 streams. The king, he's saying, takes the low place. The king is not full of bravado and narcissism. The king is low and humble. The master of the universe, showing us how to walk the way of humility, took a towel and bending down below his disciples, washed their feet. Learn not from an angel, he said, nor from man, nor from a book, but from me, from my indwelling, from my illumination and action within you. For I am meek and humble in heart, and in thought, and in spirit, and your souls shall find rest from conflicts and relief from thoughts. For just as pride dissipates the soul through imaginings and distractions, so humility collects the soul through stillness of the thoughts and concentrates her within herself. Thus the humble soul wishes to enter and dwell in stillness, to forsake her former concepts together with the senses, to become as something that does not exist in creation, that has not come into being in this world, that is totally unknown, even to herself, even to the senses. And we're going to play more on this idea of becoming unknown to yourself. It's one of the keys of mindfulness practice. Because when we go into a mindfulness practice, we still have this subtle identity of John's being mindful, Lisa's being mindful, right? I am mindful. And that is a subtle continuation of false ego, disguised in the concept of mindfulness. Mindfulness dissolves the false ego. And we're going to see how that plays out. But the teaching that we were just given here is when the soul consolidates herself, she goes into a place where she's unknown to herself. No judgments, no opinions, no past thoughts, nothing but the immediacy of watchfulness and the present moment. Right? Therefore, no conflict. Silence. What's really in conflict are our dualistic opinions and thoughts and judgments. When we've learned to quiet those, the mind ceases from being in conflict. And it finishes here by saying, thus hidden, the soul remains with the master of the universe, descending ever toward him, the infinite sea of essence, the king of 100 streams. So your mind stream, reverse his course, right? And this is right in the yoga tradition. The mind stream, when it involves itself within the material universe, is this outgoing stream, and it attaches to sense objects. And so the mind stream becomes totally identified with body and world, and it's driven onward by desire and aversion, staying attached and habitualized to this outgoing current of habit to sense objects. In this process of the mystical turnabout, the mind stream is reversed, and now you're going inward. And this beautiful picture that was just given is your mind stream keeps descending to the sea king that lies at the bottom of all streams, and you come rushing back into his silent sea. Right? That's a beautiful image where your mind stream can finally come to rest in the ocean of his presence. And just a little bit more here. Through watchfulness in the mind, we begin to grasp the analogy of the spirit and the lower soul. The spirit is immortal being and thus partakes of time transcendence, while the lower soul is tied to earthly time. The spirit, in experiencing eternity, abides in stillness, while the lower soul is involved in action that is bound to time, right? Never at peace, never at rest. As we repeatedly catch ourselves descending to the level of thought, the realm of action and time, we can call ourselves back to the level of the spirit, the realm of stillness in eternity. Later, through continual practice, we will be able to watch the thoughts coming, trying to gain admittance into our mind by stealing our attention. Right? So be vigilant, watch, guard your heart, because these thoughts come back, right? And if these thoughts are going to pull you away from your connection to the source and from your own peace, they become enemies. They are the forces of ignorance. They are hostile to life. They love death. And we have these potentialities within our mind as we've been talking. And for many of us, we've actualized and habitualized these forces of ignorance. And they keep coming for us, especially when we begin to turn within. Right? Jesus has that saying in A Course in Miracles that the ego, this force of ignorance, goes from being suspicious of your motives, that when you do have the motivation to turn within, it goes from suspicious to vicious. And so there will be an onslaught of these forces of ignorance and darkness. You will go through a spiritual tug of war when you begin to want to wake up. And you'll have not only these inner impulses and hidden forces trying to pull you away from your set aim of waking up and finding peace and being in God's presence, but these forces will also speak and act through the characters within your movie. They will come at every angle and in every way to take you away, to distract you, to cause you to pay attention to what they're witnessing and testifying to. But you have to guard your heart. You have to be watchful and know what you're dealing with. Finally here, this is one of the abilities that sets us apart from the animal world. An animal may have mental images and feel emotions, but it cannot catch and observe itself doing this. Thus, all its actions, if they are not simply instinctual, must ultimately be conditioned by environmental pressures and the images and feelings that they engender. A human being, while still living on an animal level, also acts according to outward conditioning, but still, he has the unique ability, if he will use it, to observe his mind and thus rise above his conditioning. In so doing, he ceases to react to environmental pressures, but acts instead according to the inward pressure of his spirit as it is guided by God. You always have choice. So, my friends, we're going to spend a few minutes putting into practice what we've learned here this morning. I think to set the stage, we'll just do one more little quick reading to prime the pump. This comes from the teachings of Jean de Salzman, a student of Gurdjieff. So a couple of things worth noting here before we go into our meditation. She says, speaking as the universal truth here, if I wish to understand myself, I must above all have a mind that is capable of observing without distortion. This requires my full attention, which appears only when there is a real need to know, when the mind turns everything away in order to observe. I really want to look. I want to be honest and straight with myself. I don't want to hide anything from myself anymore. I want to really see who I am. And I want to see what I've been repressing and hiding from myself. And in that process of wanting to see, true vision will begin to reveal itself to me. I will know, he said, we'll leave it here. Jesus says, once you make that choice that you really want to know, you really want to see, once you make that unequivocal choice, you're no longer alone. Because now you've just joined with the one who will show you and guide you through this depth of yourself. Okay? All right. So just a couple of pointers here. As you're going into this observation or watchfulness process, remember, you're the watcher. So there's nothing that the watcher, you can't watch the watcher. But you can identify or see the self, right? The subject that you've been, the identity. That's not the watcher. So you can see yourself. Your self-image is not you. And the thoughts that come from this self-image are not you. The judgments are not you. The opinions, the habits, the memories are not you. Everything that you feel is not the watcher, but an object that is appearing in your awareness. So your feelings are not you. And your bodily sensations are not you. They're phenomena. So you're watching the phenomena of body, emotions, thoughts, and even the self-image. It's all constructed. It's all phenomena. Be the watcher. for the final moments here, just allow the power of your attention, the watcher, like a stream or a river, to descend into the ocean of your heart, where it will merge in the presence of Christ mind, the presence of God, and feel that vast embrace of His peace and His grace as you descend and merge. So just like a seed, He is planted within our heart, and He comes alive and actualizes when we want to see Him, when we pay attention to Him. We will feel His presence when we're ready to look for His presence. It will naturally be there. Just remember, love doesn't force itself into your mind. You must open the door. You must walk across the threshold. From the alone to the alone. Namaste, my friends. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining on Facebook or YouTube, you can click the link below. Thank you for supporting the 8 a.m. service. We bless the offering. We charge it with the intention that all minds may come to know their true source and be happy. And so it is. Amen. All right, my friends, let's seal the deal. And just again coming to rest within this beautiful silence that we've cultivated this morning, within and without. And from this place of clarity and watchfulness, we will come to realize that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. A beautiful day, everybody. Course in Miracles tomorrow night, 7:15.